What's going on, it's the Polygon Don here, and today I'll be showing you guys my top 10 must-own hidden gems for the PS3. These are games I'm very happy and fortunate to have in my collection and still revisit often, and no matter how much time passes, I still come away thinking they're incredible. So without delaying any further, let's get into it. Number 10. I've spoken about this on the channel before as it featured in my underrated PS3 games volume 1 video, so if you want more of my thoughts on the game then check that out. I'll put a link in the description. But to surmise what the game essentially is, Puppeteer is a 3D side-scrolling platformer in which the player controls Kutaro, a boy changed into a puppet and then immediately decapitated. However, all is not lost as Kutaro will obtain various new heads throughout the game to replace his own, each enabling access to certain animations and dances that when performed in the right place can open up new avenues for the player to explore. Kutaro will also gain the use of certain key items such as a pair of magical scissors that enable him to cut through and travel along certain parts of the scenery to reach otherwise inaccessible areas. Set on what looks suspiciously like our moon, Kutaro is one of many children whose souls were spirited away from Earth in their sleep and changed into animated wooden puppets to be enslaved by the game's baddie, the Moon Bear King. However, with the help of the moon goddess's cat Yin Yang, Kutaro is able to escape and sets out on a journey to defeat each of the king's 12 generals, represented by the animals of the Chinese zodiac, and effectively this game's set of bosses. Some of the boss battles can veer a little too close to a QuickTime gallery for my liking, but the game as a whole is honestly great and incredibly charming. I love how it's presented as a puppet theatre show and even comes complete with audience laughter and reactions to the impressive feats you've completed on stage. Also, if you're a fan of collecting and 100%ing games, then this does have a lot to offer. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a Metroidvania, but you will need to backtrack to older levels with newer heads if you want to see and grab everything. But if like me you start enthusiastically enough and mean well only to fall by the wayside halfway through, it's nice to know that this aspect of the game isn't compulsory in order to progress the main story. Like many of the games that will feature on this list, this is starting to climb price-wise in the second-hand market. If you're not fussed about owning it physically and just want to play it, then Sony has included it in the PS Plus collection and can be played that way. But for my collector family out there that want that physical representation, this is still a must-own for the system and one you need in your collection. Number 9. Having what seems like a Rockstar Hall of Fame list of Japanese developers working on this, with Goichi Suda, aka Suda51, and Shinji Mikami of Resi fame both taking the lead, with Suda51 bringing his now almost trademark punk rock edge and Shinji Mikami adding the psychological action thrills he's famous for bringing to the Resident Evil franchise. This is a mad trip into not only the fantastical and hellish world the game is set in, but also into the minds of two of gaming's living legends. You'll play as demon hunter Garcia Hotspur, who comes home one day to find that the love of his life is being abducted by the Lord of Demons, Fleming. Powerless to stop him, Garcia watches and listens as Fleming describes the ways in which he will torture and effectively kill his girlfriend again and again. Furious, Garcia follows Fleming back to the underworld along with his demon sidekick, Johnson. Johnson acts as a guide to the underworld and can transform into various helpful artifacts to aid Garcia in his journey through hell. He can be a torch to illuminate dark areas and lightly attack enemies in a melee fashion. He can also be a variety of firearms ranging from a pistol to shotgun to automatic rifle, and he can even turn into a motorcycle so that Garcia can rest his weary feet. There are upgrade paths too so that your weapons can take on more powerful forms, either by finding the blue gems left after boss battles or through the use of red gems that can be found throughout the environment or purchased to improve damage, reload speed or ammo capacity. And there are even fights with enemies that take on a more puzzle-like feel to them. In these instances, darkness has covered an area and Garcia will eventually start taking damage whilst being exposed to it, eventually whittling down his health to 0 unless he can dissipate it by shooting at a goat's head sneakily hidden on a wall somewhere. These can get tricky, with some requiring you to open a series of locked doors before the goat's head even becomes visible, all while you're fending off demons hungry for your flesh. It's quite linear and arcadey in its level design, but I didn't mind that about it, and the action was great, the character models were gross and the humour was ridiculous. As a result of all of the above, I had a bloody good time with it, and I think you guys will too if you haven't dived in on this one yet. Number 8. Published by From Software in Japan, Atlas in the US and South Peak Games in Europe, this Zelda-feeling, Minecraft-looking action RPG from Silicon Studio is very much borrowing sensibilities and playstyles from the two games I just mentioned, but has still managed to create something entirely unique in its presentation. Using voxel-based graphics in a 3D environment emulating the 2D era of earlier video games, it doesn't look like anything else out there. And even in 2022, when Zelda clones are dished out almost on a monthly basis, this still feels fresh and unique and definitely worth checking out. The kingdom of Dotnia, where the game is set, is shrouded in a dark plague caused by the forces of an evil king known as Dark King Onyx. He brought tragedy and darkness to the kingdom by stealing 6 magical orbs, and it's down to our hero to get them back and save the day. Playing as an isometric sort of top-down view, players will move our hero from screen to screen, again as a homage to the 2D games that inspired it, exploring dungeons filled with puzzles, traps and deadly bosses. And then there's the overworld where you can battle a variety of enemies, collect hidden loot and get into all sorts of mischief. Weapons such as swords can be leveled up by increasing its length, width and magical power, and this is represented rather literally in-game, where a swing of your sword can clear an entire screen full of enemies in one sweep. It's a cool cheeky spin on the invisible RPG stats and meters that work behind the scenes and usually go unnoticed. As well as the standard fantasy RPG staple of sword and board, however, our hero will get to play around with boomerangs, lanterns, bows and bombs in order to overcome tricky puzzles, defeat enemies or just escape from a less than ideal situation. You can also create your own character model using the game's 3D sprite editor, which is a pretty nice touch too. Now, I do like Zelda games, mainly the 3D ones, but being able to play a clearly lovingly made tribute to them on a PlayStation console got my vote all day long, and the moment I found out about this game I knew I needed it in my collection. It's getting a little pricey and desirable these days, so if you're hearing about this now and are liking what you see, I'd act on this sooner rather than later. Number 7. Our boy Suda51 is back at it again with the gore and the hacking and the slashing, this time teaming up with Japan studio and filmmaker James Gunn no less to bring us the ridiculously colourful and gory cheerleader zombie hunter classic that is Lollipop Chainsaw. You'll play as Juliet, a cheerleading high schooler on her way to meet her boyfriend Nick to celebrate her 18th birthday. Unfortunately, a zombie outbreak has decided to kick off at the same time, forcing Juliet to take matters into her own hands, fighting them off one by one while she makes her way to her BF. Sadly, when she arrives, she realises Nick has been bitten, and to prevent him from turning, she decapitates him. When Nick comes to and realises he's still alive despite being just ahead, he naturally has some questions. Here Juliet reveals to him that she is in fact a descendant from a long list of zombie hunters and that she performed a magical ritual on him to save his humanity. From that moment on, Nick is primarily Juliet's belt accessory as they go to meet her zombie hunter tutor, who explains that the universe is divided into 3 realms: Earth, the land beyond words, essentially heaven, and the rotten world, a hellish place where demons and zombies come from, and that somebody has cracked open a portal between the realms, allowing hordes of zombies to cross over into Earth and ruining Juliet's birthday. The gameplay takes a hack and slash approach where Juliet can use melee combat, dodges and high and low attacks with her chainsaw in order to dispense the waves of undead, after which Juliet will be rewarded with gold medals, the amount of which will depend on the combos used and effectiveness of her killing spree, and these medals can be used to buy new moves and increase stats, etc. There's also great slow-mo cutscenes too when you manage to kill a high number of zombies with one swing of your chainsaw, where the ridiculous amounts of blood splatter is equalled by the flamboyant and sparkly use of rainbows and neon. It's so over the top in the best kind of way, and intentionally so it really does have to be experienced, even if hack and slash games aren't your thing. Now, I almost didn't include it in the list, even though I've been meaning to cover it for some time on the channel, as a remake was recently announced set to launch sometime in 2023. But then I heard there will be differences between them, namely licensing issues with the game's original music tracks, which is a huge aspect of this game's atmosphere and feel. 16 of which have been confirmed will not be making it to the remake. And then there's also speculation that the remake could be censored to some degree. I don't know if that will happen, and there's no doubt that the remake will look shiny and new and probably run a whole lot better. But taking all the potential changes into account, even with the remake on the horizon, you could argue that the PS3 version will remain unique and will continue to be what the developers originally intended the game to look, sound, and play like. Number 6. Majin and the Forsaken Kingdom by Game Republic, not the last time you'll be hearing from them in this video, is such a quality, underrated, hidden gem from this console generation. The story takes on the classic fantasy formula of a once prosperous and fruitful kingdom overcome by mysterious darkness and thrown into chaos. While many citizens tried to explore and unravel the mystery of why their world was falling apart, they were never to be seen again and the darkness continued. However, a young thief named Tapeu has other ideas and sets out to find and free the mythical Majin, an incredibly powerful mystical beast, in order to reclaim its power and use it to restore the land to its former glory. It's not breaking any new ground in the narrative department, but it does enough to paint the world with a certain atmosphere that you feel throughout your playthrough. As you may have guessed, you'll be controlling the boy thief with big ideas Tapeu as you explore, attack and outsmart your way through each area with the help of your big old pal the Majin. The Majin is AI controlled, however you can and indeed must assign commands to him in order to progress almost all areas of the game. When engaged in combat, you'll need to task the Majin to attack whichever enemy you have in your sights. Once the Majin has ploughed through them and they are down, then Tapeu can come in and finish them off, essentially taking the credit. Tapeu is weak basically and can't do all that much damage on his own, which is why in some areas of the game where Tapeu finds himself alone, the player must adopt a more stealthy approach or Tapeu will quickly be overwhelmed and it'll be game over. After most combat encounters, there will be a reprieve for exploration and environmental puzzle solving. I've got to say I love these parts of the game. Don't get me wrong, none of the puzzles are so difficult that you'll be looking up guides, but they had just enough bite to them that you still felt that sense of accomplishment once solved. And even here you'll be needing the Majin's strength, size and brute force in order to proceed. Whether it's commanding him to lift heavy doors, or crouching in front of out of reach ledges in order to use his body as a jumping off platform, thinking as both the protagonist and utilising all their respective skills is what will get you out of most situations, and I just love that about it. Speaking of skills, as you play through the game, the bond between Tapeu and the Majin grows stronger, and as a result so do certain attributes of their characters. Also, at various intervals, the Majin will learn new abilities such as AoE attacks and electricity, to name a few. These will all contribute to dispatching the enemies faster and help solve some of the trickier puzzles. An all-round crowd pleaser and colourful action-adventure game with environmental puzzle elements, this was a joy to play throughout and one I highly recommend everyone have in their collections. Number 5. What an incredible take on a classic story this is. Alice Madness Returns is a dark and twisted spin on Alice's Adventure in Wonderland, the famous Lewis Carroll book. Made far more gothic in its design and atmosphere thanks to American McGee, a video game developer most famous for working on the Doom series and the prequel to this game, American McGee's Alice, which came out in the year 2000. 11 years later, and this underrated masterpiece was released. Part hack and slash, action adventure, platformer and part psychological horror, the game follows Alice Liddell, a girl suffering from trauma caused by the death of her family in a fire. Having made it out of the psychiatric ward from the first game, Alice is now 19 and resides at an orphanage in Victorian London under the care of Dr. Angus Bumby, a psychiatrist who uses hypnosis to help his child patients forget their memories. Though she believes she is fine, Alice still suffers from hallucinations of Wonderland and regularly finds herself back there. It's during one of these trips that Alice realises a new threat is rampaging through Wonderland. Alice then makes it her mission to seek out former friends and foes in order to get to the bottom of it. All the favourites make an appearance, the Cheshire Cat, the Mad Hatter, the Caterpillar, the Walrus and the Carpenter, etc. And it's really cool to see what deranged and slightly off versions of these famous characters the game will throw at you next. Gameplay wise, you'll be controlling Alice throughout the entirety of the game in a third person perspective, and aside from running, jumping, dodging and attacking, you'll be shrinking to get yourself into otherwise impassable areas and utilising what would normally appear to be mundane household objects and turning them into weapons with a much more deadly quality. A pepper grinder will become your new crank operated Gatling gun. The teapot cannon fires deadly tea sieves that explode on impact, not only dealing heavy damage but also reveals new paths hidden behind destructible walls. Even the playful hobby horse is repurposed here to be used more like a sledgehammer, tearing down walls and hammering enemy defences. The story is great too, dark and mysterious. The game also offers plenty of twists and turns to keep you guessing throughout, but the gameplay for me just shines on this one. The platforming felt good, if a tad floaty at times, but the ingenious weapons and hack and slash action was just amazing. I really like this game a lot and it still holds up incredibly well even to this day. Number 4. Folklore by the now defunct developers Game Republic, there they are again, is an action RPG from the early days of the PS3. So early in fact that it was released before Sony introduced trophies to the PlayStation ecosystem, much to my dismay. The game is set in Ireland, primarily the beautiful yet mysterious village of Doolin, but the player will also be exploring the Netherworld, a parallel plane of existence based off of Gaelic and Brittonic mythology. Centering on a young woman named Ellen and a journalist named Keats, the player will alternate between them to unravel the mystery that the quaint village of Doolin hides. This particular mystery can only be solved by investigating the inhabitants of Doolin by day and seeking the memories of the dead in the dangerous folk-ridden Netherworld by night. From the start of each chapter, you will have the choice to play as either Ellen or Keats, the game's two lead protagonists, both having different yet intertwining plots and playstyles. Whilst in the real world of Doolin the action is restricted and instead the gameplay is focused on exploration and investigation, but once in the more fantastical Netherworld, things get a lot more action orientated. Basic attack techniques are performed by utilising folk, various creatures and spirits that upon defeat can be absorbed by the player and their abilities and strengths can then be used. When a folk is nearly defeated, its spirit will glow red. In this state you will lock onto it, then with swinging or yanking motions with your 6-axis controller will be able to reel in its energy and assign it to a face button for use later. While you can pretty much absorb any of the enemies you encounter, you can only ever have 4 assigned at any one time. Learning which folks' abilities are required for each situation is where the puzzle element comes in, and there are even books you can find scattered around the Netherworld that with the use of sketches hint at how you can beat harder enemies and certain bosses. The playstyles between Ellen and Keats and their differing perspective vary just enough to keep the momentum going. With each of them being invited to the village by mysterious circumstances, the journey to unravel the mystery of Doolin was intriguing, enjoyable and genuinely memorable. This dark fantasy murder mystery RPG completely took me by surprise and set its hooks in me early. Whether it was exploring the haunting and atmospheric village of Doolin looking for clues, or battling my way through the different realms of the Netherworld searching for answers only the dead could provide, the tone of the game was spot on throughout. Exclusive to the PS3 and as of the time of recording still locked to the system with no digital release in sight, Folklore is a one-of-a-kind action RPG oddity that's a little difficult to access these days, with prices of the physical copy steadily climbing over the last few years. I don't see that trend ending anytime soon either, so if you do manage to find a copy for a decent price, I would definitely grab it as this is one you want in your collection. Number 3. Here we have an absolute banger of a hidden gem in Shaddai, Ascension of the Metatron. Pretty much instantly you get the idea that this isn't going to be your typical third-person action game. From the moment it's launched, the game oozes charm and style with its incredible art direction and aesthetic that somehow instantly grabs your attention without being garish and in your face. The creativity from the developers and the artistry on display in this game really is top tier in my opinion. One moment it looks and feels like you're in a heavenly haze with cloudy pastels and lighter tones. only for it to swiftly divert into a more darker psychedelic fever dream. Honestly, it's one of the more artistically beautiful games that I've ever played on this console. But this is a video game and not a fine art project, so how does the gameplay stack up? Thankfully, it stacks up rather nicely and plays very well indeed. In its essence, it's a third-person action game with platforming elements in which you will control Enoch and his holy armour. Loosely based on an old Hebrew text called the Book of Enoch, Enoch is a man originally brought to heaven to act as a scribe, but he is sent down to earth by God to stop the Grigori, 7 fallen angels who stole pieces of God's wisdom and descended to earth after becoming infatuated with humans. With the help of guardian angel Lucifer, Enoch searches for 300 years for the Grigori's base, an isolated spatial realm holding a structure known as the Tower, with the 7 Grigori each controlling a floor in that tower. Enoch will have to utilise and master the 3 weapon types available to him, Arch, Gale and Veil. Arch is for swift close-range attacks that also allows Enoch to descend more slowly after jumping. Gale is a long-range weapon that fires projectiles and allows Enoch to perform dashes over large gaps. And finally Veil, which is a slow but powerful weapon that can easily damage enemies and also break objects that other weapons can't. Enoch can find and switch which weapons to use by defeating enemies that are equipped with them or by taking them from icons found during platforming sections and boss battles. Learning what weapon is most effective against each enemy will ensure your quickest route to success. The combat is fast, cerebral and relatively deep, but still accessible and easy to get to grips with. Its platforming in both the 3D and 2D section of the game felt balanced, accurate, enjoyable and welcomed when they did occur. The story is borrowed from ancient text and its grand and epic tale perfectly complements the out-of-this-world visuals and art direction. If you were to only grab one game from this list, El Shaddai puts a very strong case forward and I don't think you'll be disappointed. Number 2. Wow, I mean this game is good, very good, and took me completely by surprise. I only played this recently for the first time. I knew a little about it going in, like how it's a JRPG based on the life of Polish romantic pianist Frédéric Chopin, which was odd enough in its own merit and enough to pique my interest, but that was pretty much the extent of my prior knowledge. I actually found a copy of this out in the wild a few years back for a decent price and it's sat in my collection ever since. But now that I have played it, I can tell you it's utterly incredible. So why is this so good? Well, as mentioned, this is heavily inspired by the life and work of classical pianist Frédéric Chopin, who died of tuberculosis at the age of 39. The fantastical world the majority of the game is set in is actually the dream in which Chopin has created whilst in a coma during the last few hours of his life. The game follows many general conventions turn-based JRPGs have cemented over the years, like controlling a party of characters to explore the world, converse with its inhabitants, buy and sell equipment, encountering and battling monsters out in the field, etc, etc, but it does them with a finesse and charm that isn't always present in other games within the genre. I think it takes quite a lot for JRPGs to hit that great or excellent tier, and I think this reaches those lofty heights with ease. The characters are instantly likeable, the monster designs are fun and interesting, the battle system is unique and engaging with the use of action time and the light and shadow system affecting what magic can be used by your party, and the story, presentation and of course the music are all just fantastic in my opinion. There are even educational cutscenes featuring real paintings and photographs in contrast to the game's gorgeous cel-shaded graphics that offer more insight into the life of Chopin and just never got boring for me. This one's a bit special in my opinion. Originally released on the Xbox 360, the PS3 got its own version a year later with more content and playable characters and is generally considered to be the definitive version. I would love for this to be revisited with maybe a sequel or even a new standalone entry focusing on a different artist from the past. I mean, I'd even settle for a rush job remake of this for modern consoles, but I think I might be waiting on that for a while. So for the time being at least, this will have to do. Trophies or not, this game deserves to be played, and if you're a fan of JRPGs and don't have this yet, get it in your collection as soon as possible. You won't be disappointed. Number 1. Labelled by the media in 2012 as an interactive anime, this is a far cry from the visual novel genre that my mind immediately jumped to when I first heard that term. Then again, it is quite hard to pin down exactly what genre Asura's Wrath falls into, as it's quite the cocktail of ideas. Presented in an episodic fashion with a cliffhanger intro to get you hyped at the start and closing credits at the end of each episode to really hammer in that cinematic feel, there isn't anything quite like it that I've played. It's easily the closest thing I've come across that allows you to feel like you're actually in an anime. For the most part, it's a 3D action game where the combat can at times feel a little like a button mashy beat 'em up, but what it lacks in nuance it more than makes up for in its ambition and gorgeous character animations. It's also an on-rail shooter at times that more often than not spills into the heavens and fills your screen with dazzling lights and godly sights. And capping it off, there's also quick time events and context-sensitive button prompts that accompany the game's many cutscenes. In all forms of gameplay, however, player progress is determined by two gauges represented at the top of the screen, the life and burst gauge. The life gauge determines the current health and damage taken by the player, while the burst gauge governs Asura's special attack ability and starts empty at the start of each encounter. In order to activate it, the burst gauge must be filled up by defeating enemies and successfully inputting the QuickTime prompts in time, allowing you to release Asura's titular wrath and bask in the carnage. The story takes place on Gaia, a world inhabited by human tribes, supernaturals and gods. The game opens as our world is under attack by a demonic race known as the Goma. In an attempt to purify the world of this blight, a group of powerful and technologically advanced godlike cyborgs known as the 8 Guardian Generals arrive in a fleet of warships to engage them. Asura is one of those generals, and his daughter Mithra is the high priestess assigned to empower them in battle through the use of mantra, a cosmic energy collected from the prayers of their human worshippers and distilled through Mithra herself. Eventually, the source of the Goma reveals itself in all its earth-shattering glory, and the scale of the game itself also comes into light. The grandeur and sheer scope of some of this game's set pieces is clear and present within the first hour, and doesn't really let up after that. Now, I'm not going to go into more of the plot details here, as it would spoil a genuinely incredible tale of revenge and wrath, but I will say this quickly. If you're playing this on PS3 and have the disc physically, unfortunately you only have 2/3 of the story if you don't know already. If you want the full experience, I mean even if you just want a decent conclusion, you will need to buy the DLC from the PSN store, which is lame for a multitude of reasons, but is also a tall order these days as the process is a tad laborious, to put it politely. And as a further heads up, the most important and dare I say crucial part of this DLC doesn't even show up when you select downloadable content from the game itself. It lists 4 out of the 5 paid DLC, and the one it misses out, part 4, is easily the most important. It's essentially the true ending of the game. My advice, if you are interested, is go to the PSN store, search for Asura's Wrath there, and somewhere below the game's thumbnail image there'll be a tab for add-ons. Here you'll find a complete list of all additional content for the game. I don't normally plug DLC or even go in for it most of the time, but in this instance it's a must, and to be honest, this game deserves it. Actually, what this game deserves is a full remake from the ground up and then a sequel, but that's a rant for another video. Loosely using Buddhism and Buddhist mythology as its inspiration and combining it with sci-fi anime tropes, Asura's Wrath is a completely unique gaming experience and one that stayed in my head long after beating it. If you're an anime fan and still haven't played this, it's a must. Well, there you have it people, my top 10 must-own hidden gems for the PS3. They're all so good, and a cut above even some of the AAA titles that were released for the console, and in my humble opinion, a collection isn't quite complete without them. The next few videos will probably cover the PS4 and the PS5, as I've been picking up a fair few interesting titles for those recently, and I'm keen to show you a lot. So if you're new to the channel and appreciate the content, maybe think about hitting the like button, just have a think about it. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more PlayStation related videos. But that's going to wrap things up for this one. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, take care, be good, and game on.